The morning air carried the crisp bite of late October, the kind that nipped at the ears and coated every breath with a silver mist. Lincoln Park was quiet, the streets swept clean after last night's drizzle. James Callahan strolled at his usual steady pace, leash in hand, guiding his golden retriever along the familiar tree-lined path. At 54, he liked routines, and his neighborhood reflected that, a polished, orderly corner of Chicago where the world seemed almost insulated from chaos. That illusion shattered in a single cry. "She's not moving!" The scream came sharp, desperate, and unmistakably young. It echoed from an alleyway just ahead, slicing through the stillness like glass breaking. James stopped cold. His dog perked its ears, tugging against the leash, but James's own chest tightened with hesitation. He wasn't used to voices like that around here. Raw panic didn't belong in Lincoln Park. Yet there it was, trembling and real. If you're gripped already, pause for a moment. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Stories like this one only get deeper, and you won't want to miss what's coming. James hesitated only a moment longer before stepping toward the sound. The alley smelled of wet concrete and garbage, a sharp contrast to the manicured lawns he had left behind. He quickened his pace, shoes crunching on stray pebbles, until the source of the scream came into view. A boy knelt beside a girl sprawled on the ground. He couldn't have been older than 12, his dark jacket too thin for the cold, his hands trembling as he shook the girl's shoulder. "Amira, wake up, please, wake up!" His voice cracked, pulling at something inside James he hadn't felt in years. The girl, Amira, was maybe 16, her curls tangled against the damp pavement. Her chest rose unevenly, shallow breath struggling in and out. Her face was pale, lips tinged with a worrying shade of blue. James froze, breath caught in his throat. This wasn't his world. He knew contracts, board meetings, million-dollar deals. Not this. The boy noticed him suddenly, eyes wide with fear and hope. "Help her, mister, she's not waking up." James's first instinct was retreat. Call the authorities, let someone trained handle it. But the boy's gaze anchored him in place, pleading, desperate, demanding something more than money could buy. James cleared his throat, forcing calm into his voice. "What happened to her? We were going to school. She fell. She couldn't breathe right, and then she stopped moving." The boy's words tumbled over each other, tears streaking his cheeks. James knelt slowly, the cold of the pavement seeping through his tailored pants. He leaned close, feeling the faint rhythm of the girl's breath against his cheek. Weak, but there. Relief, fleeting and fragile, washed over him. "All right," James murmured, pulling his phone from his coat pocket. His fingers, usually so precise on a keyboard, fumbled on the screen. "We're calling 911. "Stay calm." The boy clutched her hand, nodding rapidly. "Please don't leave us, please." "I'm not going anywhere," James said more firmly this time. His own words surprised him. He had meetings scheduled, calls waiting, an empire that demanded his presence. Yet in this narrow alley, none of it seemed to matter. As the call connected, James gave the dispatcher the details, his voice clipped but steady. Teenage girl, unconscious, shallow breathing. Alley off Halstead Street, near Wrightwood. Send an ambulance. The dispatcher assured him help was on the way. James hung up, staring down at the boy who still held his sister's hand, as though sheer will could keep her alive. "What's your name?" James asked. "Tay," the boy whispered, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "All right, Tay, we'll get her help. Just keep talking to her. Let her know you're here." Tay bent close to his sister, whispering words James couldn't catch. James sat back on his heels, heart pounding harder than it had in years. The alley seemed to close in around them, the smell of damp concrete, the weight of silence broken only by the boy's hushed pleas. For the first time in a long time, James Callahan wasn't in control, and that realization struck him deeper than he expected. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, bouncing off the narrow alley walls. James felt the vibrations under his knees before he saw the flashing lights at the end of the street. Tay clutched his sister's hand tightly, eyes darting between her still face and James's steady posture, as though trying to gauge whether this stranger could really keep his promise. When the paramedics rushed in, their movements were swift, practiced. One knelt beside Amira, placing 2 fingers against her neck. "Pulse is weak," he muttered, signaling for the stretcher. Another set down a bag, pulling out equipment that looked foreign to James. Tubes, a mask, straps. James rose slowly, stepping back to give them room. His heart still hammered against his ribs. The paramedics slipped an oxygen mask over Amira's face, lifting her onto the stretcher with practiced precision. Her head lolled slightly, and James caught the sharp intake of breath from Tay. "She's going to be okay, right?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. One of the medics gave a firm nod. "We're taking her to Cook County. She's breathing, kid." "That's a good sign." James bent slightly toward Tay, his voice low. "You'll ride with her. Don't let go of her hand." Tay's small frame straightened at those words, as though the reassurance alone gave him strength. He scrambled onto the back step of the ambulance, never loosening his grip. James hesitated at the edge of the alley. His dog tugged the leash, impatient, but James's attention stayed locked on the ambulance doors swinging shut. The boy's face, pressed against the glass, burned into his mind. Something in that look tethered him to this moment, pulling him further than he had ever intended to go. He found himself climbing into his car and following the ambulance through the city streets. Stoplights blurred past as his mind reeled. He didn't know these kids. He had no obligation. And yet he couldn't shake the image of that girl lying motionless, or the desperate sound of Tay's voice. The hospital parking lot was crowded, cars jammed in every direction. James slid into a spot, the city's pulse pressing close. Honking horns, the low hum of voices, the faint smell of exhaust mingling with the antiseptic air drifting from the sliding hospital doors. Inside, the waiting room was already overflowing. Mothers with crying babies, men with bandaged arms, elderly patients slumped in wheelchairs. It was a world far removed from James's polished offices and marble lobbies. Tay sat alone on a hard plastic chair, arms wrapped around his knees, his backpack sliding off one shoulder. James lowered himself into the chair beside him. "She's with the doctors now," James said quietly. Tay didn't look up at first. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "She always takes care of me. She walks me to school, makes sure I eat. What if she doesn't wake up?" James searched for words. He had made fortunes, convincing investors, persuading councils, bending markets to his will. But faced with this boy's raw fear, he felt utterly unprepared. "She's strong," James said finally. "I saw it in her even lying there. She's fighting." The boy lifted his eyes then, searching James's face as if testing whether he truly believed what he was saying. For the first time, James felt the weight of that test. The minutes stretched long, broken only by the occasional overhead announcement. James's phone buzzed in his pocket. 3 missed calls from his assistant, a reminder about a meeting with investors. He silenced it without checking further. The world outside could wait. Finally, a nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Family of Amira Jones?" she asked. Tay leapt up. "That's us." Her gaze flicked to James briefly, perhaps puzzled by the pairing, but she didn't comment. "She's stable for now, still unconscious, but her vitals are holding. You can see her soon." Relief swept over Tay's face, so sudden and pure that James felt it himself, like air rushing back into his lungs. "Thank you," James said, though he wasn't sure whether he was speaking to the nurse, to fate, or to the girl fighting in that hospital room. He sat back down, watching the boy's shoulders finally ease, if only slightly, and in that quiet moment, James realized he had crossed an invisible line, one he hadn't even known existed until he stepped over it. James followed Tay down a corridor that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. The hospital walls were lined with scuffed paint, the linoleum floors worn to a dull shine from years of foot traffic. Overhead, a tired fluorescent bulb flickered, buzzing softly. It was nothing like the pristine private clinics James had visited before for his own checkups. This place carried the weight of struggle in every corner. They were told Amira had been moved to a room for observation. While they waited for clearance, James approached the nurses' station. A woman in scrubs tapped rapidly at her computer, her expression focused but weary. "I'd like to take care of any costs for the girl who just came in. Amira Jones," James said, sliding his credit card from his wallet with a practiced gesture. "Whatever insurance doesn't cover, I'll pay it. Just make sure she gets the best treatment you can provide." The nurse glanced at him, then at the card, her brow arching. "Sir, this is a public hospital. We don't process payments that way. She'll get the standard of care, same as everyone else." James frowned, unused to hearing no when money was involved. "There must be some way, private room, additional staff, faster attention." She cut him off with a tired sigh. "You can't buy your way around the system here. We've got people lined up in the ER who've been waiting since last night. She'll be seen in order, and if the doctor needs something specific, we'll let you know. Until then, have a seat." For a moment, James just stood there, his card still in his hand, feeling strangely powerless. He was a man accustomed to bending circumstances to his will, smoothing obstacles with cash and influence. Yet here, none of it mattered. The nurse turned back to her screen and James slipped the card into his wallet, unsettled. Tay tugged at his sleeve. "Is she gonna be okay?" James looked down at the boy's wide eyes, filled with a mix of fear and unshakable faith. "They're taking care of her. She's in the right place," James answered, though a part of him wondered if that was true. The hall was filled with groans, muffled coughs, and the occasional raised voice. This didn't feel like the right place for anyone. They were finally allowed into Amira's room. She lay still, the rise and fall of her chest faint beneath the thin blanket. Machines beeped steadily at her side, wires and tubes snaking across her small frame. The sight tugged at James in a way he didn't expect. For reasons he couldn't quite name, the vulnerability in her stillness cut through him more than he cared to admit. Tay pulled up a chair and settled beside her, his hand gripping hers. "I'm here, Amira. I'm not leaving you," he whispered. James stood by the door, feeling awkward, like an intruder in a story that wasn't his. He watched the boy's quiet determination, the way his small shoulders squared with responsibility far beyond his years. It was a posture James recognized, not from childhood but from his own climb to power. A fight to hold on no matter the odds. He caught himself rubbing his temple. What was he even doing here? He had meetings scheduled, contracts waiting, partners expecting updates. Yet he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Something about this brother and sister, so fiercely tied together in the face of uncertainty, kept him rooted. The nurse returned briefly to check the monitors. James asked again, "Is there anything more we can do for her?" "She's stable for now," the nurse said, adjusting a drip. "But the next 24 hours will tell us more. For now, just let her rest." As she left, the room sank back into quiet, broken only by the machine's steady rhythm. James pulled a chair closer and sat, his eyes drifting between Amira's still form and the boy watching her. For once, he had no solutions, no strategies, no influence to wield. All he could do was wait, just like everyone else. The night dragged on, stretching time into something heavy and uncertain. In Amira's room, the dim glow of the monitor cast pale light over her still face. Tay remained glued to her side, his hand wrapped firmly around hers, whispering words only siblings could share. James lingered in the corner, restless. Every hour his phone buzzed with reminders he ignored. When the nurse finally returned with an update, James rose immediately. "How is she?" "She's stable," the nurse said, offering a small smile toward Tay. "She needs rest, and we'll continue to monitor her closely. You should both go home. Get some sleep." Tay's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "I can't leave her. What if she wakes up and I'm not here?" James stepped closer. "The doctors will be here and the nurse will check on her. She'll be safe." But the boy shook his head violently. "No. Mom's at work. She doesn't even know yet. If I leave, Amira will be alone." His voice cracked, panic spilling through every word. James hesitated, glancing at the nurse. She sighed. "He can stay a little while longer, but visiting hours are ending soon. After that, he'll need to leave." When she walked away, the boy's shoulders slumped. He looked small, dwarfed by the machines around him. James crouched to his level, Tay, where do you go when your mom's working? Home, he muttered. But it's not safe without her. Amira usually takes care of me. She makes sure I don't mess up homework, cooks noodles if I'm hungry. But now, he trailed off, wiping his sleeve across his face. A thought pressed hard against James's chest. This boy had no one else tonight. If James left him here, if he turned his back, Tay would be alone in a world that already demanded too much of him. James cleared his throat. You can come with me. The boy blinked, confused. With you? Where? My house. Just for tonight, James added quickly, as though reassuring himself as much as the child. Until your mom gets off work or your sister wakes up. Tay studied him carefully, suspicion flickering across his young face. Why would you do that? You don't even know us. James exhaled slowly. Because I don't want you sitting alone in an empty apartment, worrying about her all night. And because sometimes people need help, that's all. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Tay gave a small nod, though his grip on Amira's hand tightened for one last moment before he whispered, I'll come back first thing in the morning, Amira. Don't be mad at me. James waited while the nurse signed them out. The boy followed him quietly through the hospital corridors, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Outside, the chill of the night hit them both, sharp and unforgiving. James unlocked his car, the leather interior a stark contrast to the world they'd just left. Tay slid into the seat cautiously, glancing around at the polished dashboard. This car's nicer than our whole apartment, he murmured. James forced a faint smile. It's just a car. But the boy's words lingered, cutting deeper than he expected. The drive back to Lincoln Park was quiet, the city lights streaking across the windows. Tay kept his forehead against the glass, watching neighborhoods blur past. James stole glances at him, struck by the mix of defiance and vulnerability in his small frame. When they pulled into the driveway, Tay stared at the sprawling house with wide eyes. You live here? James nodded. Yes, come on, it's late. Inside, the warmth and order of the house wrapped around them, soft rugs, polished wood, the faint scent of cedar. Tay stood awkwardly in the foyer, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. You can stay in the guest room, James said gently. There are clean sheets, a bathroom, everything you need. Tomorrow, we'll check on your sister. The boy hesitated, then whispered, Thanks. I'll only stay tonight. James gave a small nod. Just tonight? But as he climbed the stairs, something in his gut told him this was only the beginning. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. James had shown Tay to the guest room, but long after the boy's door clicked shut, James found himself standing in his own study, glass of bourbon untouched on the desk. His thoughts wouldn't settle. Every corner of the house reminded him of what it had been before his children drifted away, back when laughter had filled these rooms instead of echoes. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the polished floors. James entered the kitchen to find Tay perched at the counter, staring at a bowl of cereal as though it belonged in a museum. How you got like 10 kinds of milk in your fridge, the boy said. James chuckled softly. Just options. People like choices. Back home, we just got regular milk, Tay muttered, spoon clinking. Before James could respond, the sound of the front door opening cut through the room. His daughter Elizabeth strode in, heels clicking sharply against the tile. She was 30, all precision and control, every movement polished. Her eyes immediately landed on Tay. Dad, she said flatly, setting her handbag down. Who is this? James straightened. This is Tay. He's Amira's brother, the girl from yesterday. Elizabeth's brow furrowed. You brought a stranger into the house, a child you don't know. He had nowhere else to go, James replied evenly. Do you even hear yourself? She pressed, incredulous. This isn't safe. What are you thinking? Tay shifted uncomfortably, shrinking into his chair. James felt a protective instinct flare up. I'm thinking he needed help, and I could give it. That's all. Elizabeth's lips tightened. You've spent your whole life keeping this place controlled, pristine, locked down, and now suddenly you're... What? Playing foster parent? James exhaled, rubbing his temple. It's one night, Liz, just one night. Her eyes softened for a moment, but only briefly. I hope you know what you're doing, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you don't. She left as quickly as she had entered, the slam of the door rattling the glass in the cabinets. Silence fell heavy again. Tay glanced up, voice small. Sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble. James sat down across from him, shaking his head. It's not you. Sometimes families argue, even when they don't mean to. The boy studied him, eyes narrowing in quiet curiosity. She doesn't like me. It's not about you, James said. It's about me. Choices I've made. He didn't elaborate, though memories pressed at him. Missed birthdays, arguments with his ex-wife, the widening gap between him and his children. Success had always come first, and now he was left with the shell of a family that no longer trusted his decisions. Later, as Tay explored the living room, his small fingers tracing the spines of untouched books, James lingered in the doorway. The boy's presence was already unsettling the rigid order of his life. There were crumbs on the counter, a backpack slouched against the sofa, sneakers leaving faint scuffs on the polished floor. And yet, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, James didn't mind. He found himself speaking without planning to. When I was your age, I lived in a house about the size of this kitchen. My father worked 2 jobs. My mother sewed clothes at night. I used to think if I ever made enough money, I'd fix everything. Buy peace, buy love. But some things... He paused, words catching. Some things money doesn't fix. Tay looked at him, eyes wide and unblinking. So what fixes it? James didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. That night, as he passed the guest room, James heard the boy's steady breathing, a reminder of how quickly this unexpected presence had threaded into his home. He lay awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around him. For the first time in years, he wondered if his carefully constructed world was beginning to crack, and if maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. Morning light poured through the wide kitchen windows, illuminating a table spread with untouched fruit, pastries, and a steaming pot of coffee. James sat with the paper folded in his hands, though his eyes had barely scanned a single word. Across the counter, Tay perched on a stool, spinning a spoon inside his glass of orange juice as if it were a toy. You read that whole thing? Tay asked, nodding toward the newspaper. Usually, James replied, lowering it. Helps me keep track of the market, what's happening in the city. The boy frowned. Looks boring. Don't you get news on your phone like everyone else? James smirked faintly. Some habits stick. For a moment silence stretched. Then Tay leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You don't talk like people I know. You say things all proper. Even when you're mad. You ever say stuff like, man, that sucks? The question startled a laugh from James, deep and unexpected. I suppose I don't. Old habits again. Feels like you live in another world, Tay muttered, sliding off the stool. Where I'm from, you don't got time for fancy words. You just say it. James followed as the boy wandered into the living room, scanning the shelves lined with travel books and framed photos of his children when they were small. Tay paused at one photo of Elizabeth in a ballet costume. That your daughter? The one who yelled at you yesterday? Yes, James said carefully. She looks happy here. James's throat tightened. That was a long time ago. Tay studied the picture a moment longer before turning away. Maybe she just wants you to listen. Amira says grown-ups forget how to do that. James leaned against the doorway, struck by the boy's bluntness. In meetings, colleagues tiptoed around him, careful with their words. Yet here was a 12-year-old dismantling him with honesty. Later, they took a walk through the neighborhood. The streets were wide, the houses tall, their lawns manicured to perfection. Tay kicked at fallen leaves, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. Nobody even sits on their porches here, he said. Back home, people be outside all the time. Music, kids running around, folks yelling across the street, feels alive. James glanced around. It was true. Lincoln Park's quiet order felt sterile next to the chaos the boy described. Some people prefer peace, he offered. Tay shook his head. Peace is fine. But this feels like everybody's hiding. The words lingered with James long after they returned to the house. He saw his neighborhood through new eyes, sterile, distant, a world of gates and locks. For the first time, he wondered if success had trapped him inside a bubble he hadn't even noticed forming. That evening, as James prepared dinner, Tay wandered in and wrinkled his nose at the sight of salmon fillets on the counter. "We don't eat stuff like that. Amira makes noodles with hot dogs, sometimes mac and cheese if we got enough." "You'll like this," James said with quiet certainty. When the plates were served, Tay poked suspiciously at the fish. He took a tentative bite, then blinked. "Okay, it's not bad," he admitted. James chuckled, a rare warmth rising in him. "Not bad is high praise." The boy grinned, but it faded quickly. "Wish Amira was here to try it." The room fell quiet again, the weight of her absence pressing heavy. James looked at the boy across the table, sharp eyes, guarded but honest, and realized he was learning more about life in these 2 days than he had in years of boardrooms. When Tay finally excused himself for bed, James lingered in the dining room, staring at the untouched wine glass beside his plate. Through a child's eyes, his world had been stripped bare, clean, controlled, and somehow lifeless. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he liked what he saw. The next morning came grey and damp, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. James drove Tay back to the hospital, the boy staring silently out the window as the city blocks shifted from clean, tree-lined streets to crowded intersections filled with corner stores and cracked sidewalks. Neither spoke much, but the weight of anticipation pressed between them. When they reached Amira's room, Tay rushed forward, his small hands wrapping around hers the moment he saw her. She remained unconscious, her chest rising and falling in steady but shallow rhythm. James stood in the doorway, uncertain how long he should linger. A woman with graying braids and sharp eyes entered moments later, carrying a folder against her chest. She introduced herself briskly. "Denise Carter. I'm the hospital's social worker. You must be Tay." The boy nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Denise's gaze shifted to James. "And you are?" "I found them," James said simply. "Yesterday." "In the alley." Something softened in her expression, though she didn't let it show fully. "Then you've seen a part of their world most people here don't. Amira's a remarkable girl." James tilted his head. "Remarkable how?" Denise pulled up a chair, her voice steady but laced with admiration. "She's 16, top of her class even while working 2 part-time jobs. Tutors kids in the neighborhood at the library, keeps her brother on track when their mother's working nights. She's the kind of student teachers remember years later. But all that responsibility, it takes a toll." James glanced at the girl lying pale and motionless under hospital sheets. He struggled to reconcile the description with the fragile figure before him. "She looks too young for all of that." "She didn't have a choice," Denise said firmly. "Most don't where they live. She stepped up because someone had to." Tay squeezed his sister's hand tighter. "She's the best, better than anyone." James lowered himself into a chair, his mind spinning. He had raised children with every advantage, private schools, tutors, vacations abroad, and still they had resented him, pulled away. And here was a girl from Bronzeville, carrying the weight of her family with nothing but grit and determination. Denise studied him carefully. "You're not family, are you?" "No," James admitted. "Just someone who happened to be there." "Yet you stayed," she replied. "Most people wouldn't. They'd call for help and move on." James didn't answer, though the words cut deep. He didn't fully understand why he was still here either. Denise shifted her folder. "If Amira pulls through, and I believe she will, she's got a future worth fighting for, but the world won't make it easy. People like her, kids like Tay, they slip through the cracks unless someone insists they don't." Her eyes lingered on him with meaning he couldn't shake. James looked back at Amira, trying to reconcile her story with the life he had built for himself, where struggles were solved with signatures and bank transfers. Tay broke the silence, his voice small. "Can she still go to school when she wakes up?" Denise smiled gently. "She'll need rest first, but yes, with the right care she can get back to it." The boy nodded, relief flickering across his face. James leaned back, feeling a strange weight pressing against him. It wasn't responsibility, not exactly, but something more unsettling: admiration. Amira, even unconscious, represented a strength he realized he had never fostered in his own children. She fought for survival and still found a way to lift others with her. And here he was, a man who had built towers of glass and steel, but couldn't bridge the distance within his own family. As the monitors hummed steadily beside the girl, James sat quietly, the storm inside him growing louder. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one truth had already taken root. He needed to understand her story. 2 days later, when Amira's condition remained steady but unchanged, James found himself behind the wheel of his car again, this time with Tay in the passenger seat. The boy had been insistent. "You gotta see where we live," he'd said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and defensiveness. James hadn't argued. A quiet curiosity had been gnawing at him since Denise had painted a picture of their lives. The streets shifted gradually as they drove south. The manicured lawns and fresh paint of Lincoln Park gave way to cracked sidewalks, shuttered storefronts and murals fading under years of weather. Bronzeville carried history in its bones: murals of jazz musicians, hand-painted signs for community churches, candles burning on corners where lives had been cut short. The air smelled different here, a mix of fried food, exhaust, and something James couldn't name but felt all the same: resilience. Tay pointed out landmarks as they passed. "That's where Amira tutors kids. And that corner store. She gets us chips when we got a little extra." His voice brightened with each mention, but his eyes flicked nervously whenever they passed boarded-up windows or groups of men standing on corners. They pulled up to a small brick apartment building, its paint chipped and stairwell railing rusted. Laundry hung from a second-floor window. The place felt fragile, like one hard storm could take it down. Inside the corner store nearby, the bell above the door jingled as they entered. The shelves were crammed with canned goods, candy, and off-brand cereal. A man behind the counter, his hair graying at the edges, narrowed his eyes at James. "You're not from around here," the man said flatly. James offered a polite nod. "I'm just with him." He gestured toward Tay, who was already rifling through a box of cheap toys near the counter. The man's gaze softened slightly when it landed on the boy, but his attention returned to James with sharpness. "People like you come here sometimes, not to buy snacks, to buy buildings." James shifted, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" The man leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. "Developers, real estate men, they see cheap property and think profit. Build shiny condos nobody here can afford. Then families like his get pushed out." He nodded toward Tay. "You build your towers, you kill this place." The words struck James harder than he expected. He had heard versions of this argument in meetings, community forums, and newspaper columns, but hearing it here in the neighborhood itself, with Tay at his side, it felt different. "I didn't come here for that," James said quietly. The man studied him for a long moment, as though weighing the truth of his words. Finally, he gave a small shrug. "Maybe not today." But men in suits always come back. On the walk back to the car, Tay kicked at loose stones, his shoulders hunched. "He doesn't like you." James sighed. "He doesn't know me." "He knows the kind of people you are, though," Tay said bluntly. The honesty stung, more than James cared to admit. He opened the car door for the boy, but lingered on the curb for a moment, taking in the street around him. Children ran past with basketballs, their laughter loud against the backdrop of sirens in the distance. A group of women sat on stoops, talking in low voices, watching everything with sharp eyes. Life pulsed here, raw and unfiltered. As James slid back into the driver's seat, Tay looked at him carefully. "You don't get it, do you? This is home. It ain't perfect, but it's ours. And every time someone like you wants to build something new, it means people like us gotta leave." James gripped the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. The boy's words echoed in his chest, uncomfortable and true. For the first time, he wondered if the empire he had built had done more harm than good. The following week unfolded in fragments: hospital visits with Tay, brief updates from Denise, restless nights where James lay awake staring at his ceiling. but by Thursday morning, his other life came crashing back in. In the sleek boardroom of Callahan Development, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline. Around the polished table sat men and women in tailored suits, their voices confident, their eyes sharp. A large map of Bronzeville lay spread across the table, covered in color-coded outlines. "This is it," one executive said, tapping the map. "Our most ambitious project in years. We acquire the blocks between 35th and Indiana, level the old complexes, and break ground on luxury condos by spring. Investors are already lining up." James's chest tightened. He recognized the streets instantly. They weren't just coordinates anymore. They were the backdrop of Tay's stories, the streets where Amira tutored, the corner store where suspicion had greeted him. Another voice chimed in. "The city's eager for this. They want revitalization. And with the right PR, we'll position ourselves as heroes, bringing prosperity to a struggling area." James heard the words but felt a rising unease. Heroes? He pictured the shopkeepers' glare, the mothers on the stoops watching strangers march past their homes. Prosperity wasn't what they would see. Displacement was. "James?" His partner Carl leaned forward. "You've been quiet. You signed off on this months ago. Are we ready to move?" The room stilled, waiting for his answer. James swallowed, buying time. "I've been looking closer at the area. There are families there, schools, community centers. What happens to them if we move forward?" Carl's expression hardened. "They'll relocate. That's the nature of progress. We can offer stipends, maybe set aside a few affordable units for good optics, but this is bigger than a handful of tenants." A younger associate interjected eagerly. "This is about vision. Imagine what Bronzeville could look like in 5 years. Cafes, galleries, young professionals moving in. Property values will skyrocket. It'll put Callahan Development on the map for a new generation." Their voices blended into a hum of ambition, but James's mind kept drifting back to Amira's still figure in the hospital bed. She hadn't asked for saving, Denise had said. She wanted a chance, and what chance would remain if her neighborhood was gutted and sold to the highest bidder? Carl leaned in again, lowering his voice. "Look, James, you've built your career on bold moves. Don't start second-guessing now. This project is legacy-defining. And let's be honest, you're not doing this for the money. You're doing it to leave a mark." The word legacy landed heavy in James's chest. He thought of Elizabeth's sharp eyes in the kitchen, filled with disapproval. He thought of Tay, who had stared at him in the car and said, "This is home." For the first time in his career, James felt the floor tilt beneath him. He was being asked to choose between the empire he had built and the fragile trust he was beginning to form with 2 children who had stumbled into his life. "Let me review the details again," James said finally, his voice steady though his palms felt damp. "I'll have my decision by the end of the week." The executives exchanged glances, but no one argued. They trusted him. He had earned that trust with decades of decisive leadership. But as the meeting broke and the room emptied, James remained seated, staring at the map. The colored outlines glowed under the recessed lights, neat and orderly. Yet in his mind they blurred into faces, children running with basketballs, women on stoops, a boy kicking at stones with quiet defiance. The offer was on the table. But for the first time, James wasn't sure if signing his name would mean triumph or betrayal. The rhythmic beep of the monitor had become a strange comfort, steady and unchanging. For days, James had visited Amira's room with Tay, bringing books and snacks, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes listening to the boy's endless stories about his sister. But on a crisp Saturday morning, the silence broke. Tay was leaning over the bed, whispering as always. "You promised you'd take me to the park this weekend, remember? I'm not going without you." His voice wavered, but his grip on her hand was firm. Then, a faint movement. Her fingers twitched. Tay gasped. "Dad!" He stopped, correcting himself. "James! She moved!" James stood instantly, leaning forward. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened halfway, squinting at the harsh light. She inhaled sharply, a shaky, ragged breath, and whispered, "Tay, The boy's face broke into tears and laughter all at once. "I'm here. You're okay, Amira. You're really okay." Her lips curled into the faintest smile before her eyes shifted toward James. Confusion flickered there. "Who's he?" James straightened, suddenly awkward. "I'm... James. I was nearby when you collapsed." I called for help. Her gaze lingered on him, studying his expensive jacket, the careful way he held himself, as though she could read his story without words. "Thank you," she said softly. "But we don't need saving." James froze, taken aback. "I wasn't trying to—" He stopped, realizing how defensive he sounded. He lowered his voice. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe." She looked at her brother, then back at him. "Safe is a luxury we don't get. What we need is a chance, a fair one." The words landed heavier than he expected, carrying a wisdom that felt far older than 16. For a moment he couldn't respond. Tay filled the silence, practically climbing onto the bed with relief. "See, I told you. You scared me so bad." "Thought you weren't coming back." Amira brushed his cheek weakly with her hand. "I promised, didn't I? I don't break promises." The nurse came in then, her face breaking into a smile. "Well, look who's awake. We'll run some tests, but this is a good sign." As she checked vitals, Amira's eyes never left James. There was no hostility in them, but neither was there gratitude the way he expected. It was more complex, measured, cautious, as if she had already learned that every kindness came with strings. When the nurse left, James cleared his throat. "You're remarkable. Your brother talks about you non-stop." Amira gave a small laugh that turned into a cough. "I bet he does. He's my shadow, won't leave me alone." "You take care of him," James said quietly. "Someone has to," she replied, voice firm despite her weakness. "Mom works all night. Bills don't wait. Rent doesn't wait. I'm the one who makes sure he stays in school, that he eats, that he doesn't—" She trailed off, eyes clouding briefly. James felt a knot tighten in his chest. "That's a lot for you to carry." Her eyes sharpened. "It's not about what I carry, it's about surviving. People think kids like us are waiting to be saved. We're not. We're just waiting for the world to stop working against us." The room went quiet. Tay rested his head on her arm, already drifting to sleep from exhaustion. But James remained frozen in thought. Amira had barely returned to consciousness, yet she spoke with a clarity that pierced through him. She wasn't asking for charity or pity. She was demanding space to fight her own battles. And for the first time, James wondered if the greatest thing he could offer wasn't protection, but possibility. Amira's recovery was slow but steady. Each day brought a little more color to her cheeks, a little more strength to her voice. James and Tay visited daily, though Amira sometimes teased her brother for hovering too much. "You're worse than the nurses," she said one afternoon, earning a sheepish grin from the boy. On one visit, Denise entered the room carrying a stack of flyers. She handed one to James. Across the top in bold letters, it read, "Community Futures Initiative, Youth Entrepreneurship Program. We're holding a fundraiser next week," Denise explained, "trying to keep this program alive. The city slashed funding again, and if we can't replace it, these kids lose a shot at something better." James scanned the flyer. "You're teaching business skills?" "Exactly," Denise said. "Budgeting, leadership, marketing, tools that give young people a path besides the streets. Amira here was one of our best volunteers before." She gestured gently toward the hospital bed. Amira lifted her chin. "I'll be back as soon as they let me. The kids need it." James hesitated. The word fundraiser echoed in his mind. In his world, events like this were cocktail parties in glass towers with wine lists longer than dinner menus. He looked at Amira, then at Denise. "What if I helped?" Denise raised an eyebrow. "Helped how?" "I could cover the funding gap," James said plainly. "Whatever you need to keep the doors open." But Denise shook her head, firm but not unkind. "Money helps, but it's not enough. We've had donors before who write checks and disappear. What we need are partners. People who show up, who listen, who let the kids shape their own future." James felt the sting of truth in her words. He thought of Amira's steady gaze when she'd told him, "We don't need saving, we need a chance." He nodded slowly. "Then let me be more than a check. Teach me how to help. Show me where to start." Denise studied him for a long moment before giving a short nod. "All right, we'll see if you mean that." The following week, James attended the fundraiser. It was held not in a ballroom, but in a modest church basement, the kind with folding chairs and linoleum floors. Handmade posters decorated the walls, each one drawn by a student with bold markers: My Future Bakery, Tech Club, Neighborhood Clothing Line. James walked among the tables, listening to kids pitch their ideas with nervous excitement. A boy explained his plan for a sneaker repair business. A girl described her dream of opening a small cafe with homemade pies. Their voices carried raw energy, the kind money couldn't buy. At one table, James paused to listen as Amira, still weak but determined, described her vision for a tutoring center that would expand beyond the library. "If kids can learn earlier, they'll believe they can do anything," she said firmly. "It changes everything." James felt something stir inside him. Admiration, yes, but also regret. He had spent his career building monuments of glass and steel, yet none of them carried this kind of weight. After the event, he approached Denise. "I want to invest, not just funds, but time, space, resources. I have properties that could be used for programs like this, offices that sit empty, let's put them to work." Denise folded her arms, skeptical but intrigued. "You'd hand over your buildings?" "Not hand over," James clarified. "Partner. Create something sustainable. Let the community lead, I'll support. I'm tired of building things that don't last." Denise gave him a long, measuring look before finally extending her hand. "If you're serious, we'll hold you to it." James clasped it firmly. For once, the handshake wasn't about sealing a deal for profit. It was about opening a door. As he left the basement that night, James glanced at Amira and Tay standing together near the exit, their faces lit with cautious hope. For the first time, he felt he was building something worth more than money could measure. The deal in Bronzeville lingered like a shadow over James's newfound commitments. He could feel it pressing at the edges of every meeting with Denise, every moment he spent watching Amira's determination or listening to Tay's steady chatter. The development company expected his signature, investors were waiting, and his children, his own blood, had grown restless, demanding answers. One evening they gathered in his home, Elizabeth sharp and impatient. Michael, his eldest son, quieter but equally skeptical. The air was thick with tension before the conversation even began. Elizabeth broke first. "We need to talk about what you're doing, Dad. Word's already spreading. You're meeting with community activists, promising properties, talking about programs." "What's going on?" James sat at the head of the dining table, the same table where family dinners had once been routine. "I'm reassessing some projects," he said evenly, "considering new ways to use our resources." Michael leaned forward, his tone measured. "You mean the Bronzeville project? That's supposed to be the company's future. You spent months telling us it was non-negotiable." "I know what I said," James admitted, "but I've seen things I can't ignore. Families who will be displaced, kids with no safety net. If we move forward the way it's planned, we'll destroy more than we build." Elizabeth scoffed, arms crossing tightly. "So what, you're going to throw away decades of work because a few people made you feel guilty? That's not leadership. That's weakness." The words cut deeper than she intended. James steadied his breath. "It's not guilt. It's clarity. I spent my life building towers, but what's left when those towers don't serve the people who live in their shadows?" Michael exchanged a glance with his sister before speaking. "If you cancel this project, investors will walk. You'll jeopardize everything we've built. You talk about legacy, but what happens if that legacy collapses? What do you leave us then?" James looked at his son, at the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger he had once carried. He saw ambition, sharp and blinding, but also emptiness. "Maybe it's time I leave you something different," he said quietly. Elizabeth's voice sharpened. "Don't you dare use your midlife crisis to rob us of our inheritance. If you want to play charity, fine. Do it with your personal money. But don't drag the company down with you." The accusation landed heavy, But James didn't flinch. He rose from his chair, walking to the cabinet where a folder sat waiting. He had prepared it days ago, though he hadn't known if he'd ever find the courage to use it. He placed the folder on the table and slid it across. Inside were documents transferring a significant portion of his estate, not the company's, but his personal holdings, into a trust for the new community initiative. Properties, investments, even his own home. Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I am," James said firmly. "This house, my portfolio, it's going to fund the center. Offices for programs, scholarships, spaces where kids can build futures without being pushed aside." Michael's voice dropped, heavy with disbelief. "You're giving it all away? To strangers?" "Not strangers," James corrected. "To the future. To people who remind me what matters. To kids who fight harder than I ever had to." Silence stretched. Elizabeth pushed back her chair with a sharp scrape, fury written in every line of her face. "If you do this, don't expect us to stand by you. You're on your own." She stormed out, Michael following reluctantly, his expression clouded with something between anger and sorrow. When the door slammed, James remained at the table alone, the document still resting in front of him. His hands trembled, not from doubt, but from the gravity of the choice. For once he wasn't sure if his children would ever forgive him, but he knew this. He had spent his life chasing a legacy of stone and glass. Now, he was ready to build one of flesh and hope. The gymnasium smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, the result of hurried renovations funded by the first wave of James's contributions. Folding chairs lined the basketball court, filled with parents, neighbors, and children buzzing with anticipation. At the front, a makeshift stage held a microphone that looked almost too tall for the boy who now stepped up to it. Tay cleared his throat nervously, shifting from one foot to the other. His oversized sweater hung awkwardly, sleeves covering his hands. The chatter of the crowd softened into silence, all eyes fixed on him. James sat near the back, hands clasped, heart pounding harder than in any boardroom he had ever entered. "My name is Tay Jones," the boy began, his voice cracking at the edges, but growing stronger with each word. "Most of you know my sister Amira. She's the one who always helps at the library, the one who tutors kids when they're falling behind. She's my hero." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Amira, still recovering, sat in a wheelchair near the front, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but her eyes glowing with pride. Tay continued, "A few weeks ago, something scary happened. Amira collapsed on our way to school. I thought I was going to lose her. I yelled for help and someone actually came. A man who didn't know us, who didn't have to stop, but he did. He called for help and he stayed. That man is Mr. Callahan." Dozens of heads turned toward James. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, resisting the urge to shrink into the shadows. "I didn't know much about him," Tay went on. "He's rich. Lives in a house bigger than I thought houses could be. At first I didn't trust him. People like him don't usually see kids like me. But he listened, and he didn't just listen. He did something. He helped us, and now he's helping this whole neighborhood." The boy's voice grew louder, steadier, carrying the weight of truth. "Sometimes people think we don't matter, that we're just kids from streets they don't care about. But what Mr. Callahan showed me is that even someone powerful can change. And if he can change, maybe other people will too." The gym erupted in applause. Not the polite kind James was used to at corporate galas, but raw, thunderous clapping mixed with cheers and whistles. Amira clapped the hardest, her smile bright despite her exhaustion. James felt heat rising in his chest. Not pride exactly, but something deeper. Humility, perhaps. He had come expecting to be a silent observer, but now the weight of the community's eyes pressed on him. He wasn't sure he deserved their gratitude. After the event, reporters cornered him in the parking lot. Microphones were shoved in his face, cameras flashing. "Mr. Callahan, how does it feel to be called a hero by the community?" one asked. James shook his head quickly. "I'm no hero. I just did what anyone should do. The real heroes are the kids who keep showing up every day, fighting for their futures, the teachers, the parents, the mentors who hold this place together." Another reporter shouted, "Will this change the direction of your company?" Are you abandoning development projects to focus on charity? James paused, measuring his words carefully. This isn't charity, it's responsibility. For too long, I thought success was about building higher and faster. But true success is building something that lasts, something that lifts people up instead of pushing them out. The clip aired that night, and by morning it had spread far beyond Chicago. Social media carried Tay's speech across the country. A rich man finally listened, one headline read. Offers for interviews and awards began to flood James's office. But when his assistant asked which ones to accept, James simply replied, none. He didn't want a spotlight, he wanted change. And as he watched Amira wheel herself out of the gym, Tay pushing from behind, James realized the real story wasn't about him at all. It was about them, the voices of the streets rising loud enough to finally be heard. The days following Tay's speech seemed to pass in a blur. James spent more time in Bronzeville than he had ever expected, meeting with local leaders, helping secure funding, and aligning the resources of his company with the growing needs of the community. The balance wasn't easy. His board still expected results, and his own family had only grown more distant. One evening, after a particularly tense call with his son Michael, who had yet to speak to him since the fallout over the estate, James found himself on the porch of his home, staring at the city skyline in the distance. The light was dimming, the sky turning a soft purple as night crept in. He wondered if his children would ever forgive him for making a choice that tore their world apart. He heard footsteps behind him. Tay. The boy had been shadowing him for weeks, following him around the community center like a quiet echo. I'm sorry, Tay said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, for making things hard with your family. James turned to face him, surprised. You didn't cause anything, Tay. The boy shook his head. You've been doing all this, and they're still mad at you. I don't understand why they don't get it. You're trying to help. James smiled sadly. Sometimes helping doesn't look the way people want it to. Change is messy, and I've spent so long building things the way I thought they should be that I didn't stop to think about what they really needed. Tay stood a little straighter. I think you're doing the right thing. The warmth in the boy's voice made James feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind that came with deals or new projects, but the kind that came with real change. That night, as James prepared for bed, his phone buzzed. He saw the name on the screen, Elizabeth. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Dad, she said, her voice softer than he expected. We need to talk. The words hung in the air between them. For a moment he thought she might yell or accuse him of ruining everything. But when she spoke again, it was different. I've been thinking about what you're doing, about why you're doing it, Elizabeth said. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but I can see now why it matters to you. James felt a tightness in his chest. Elizabeth, I don't know if I can ever be okay with you giving away everything, but I think I understand why you had to. Maybe we should all be doing something like that. Not just for ourselves. The words were still tentative, uncertain, but they were a step. I'm sorry, she continued, her voice thickening. I didn't mean to push you away. I just didn't know how to handle it. But maybe I've been too focused on what I lost instead of what we can give. James sat in silence for a long moment. His heart ached, but there was a lightness to it that he hadn't felt in years. The bridge wasn't fully rebuilt, but it had cracked open, and that was enough for now. I've missed you, Liz, he said quietly. I know I've messed up, but I want to fix this. I want to show you the change I'm trying to make, not just in the city, but with us. Let's start with that, she replied. I'm not sure how, but I'll try. As they ended the call, James felt something shift inside him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still battles to fight, both in the community and with his family. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone in it. The next day, he sat with Tay and Amira at the community center, watching as more kids came in to use the new tutoring rooms. The space was alive, buzzing with possibility. This wasn't just about saving a neighborhood. It was about giving people the chance to define their own futures. Amira smiled at him from across the room. "You're doing it, aren't you?" she asked softly. James nodded. "I'm trying." "You're doing more than that." And for the first time in years, James believed it. He wasn't just creating a legacy of buildings. He was helping to create a legacy of people, people who would carry their own stories, their own dreams, and make their mark on the world. It had been a year since James had made the decision to give away his estate, to invest not in buildings, but in people. The community centre in Bronzeville was thriving, a bustling hub of education, art, and opportunity. The once neglected spaces were now filled with kids, all chasing dreams that had previously seemed out of reach. James had worked tirelessly alongside Denise and Amira, learning not just about the community, but about himself, about what truly mattered. One bright morning, James arrived early at the centre, a large coffee in hand. As he stepped inside, he saw the kids milling about, laughing, talking, their energy contagious. A small group was gathered around Tay, who was showing off a project on his laptop, a digital design for a new youth clothing line they were launching as part of a workshop. Amira stood by, offering guidance, her confidence now radiating as it always had in the classroom, but with a newfound strength. "Mr. Callahan," Tay called out, his face lighting up. "You have to see this. I'm designing my own logo now. The kids are gonna love it." James smiled and approached, his heart swelling. "I'm proud of you, Tay. You've really come a long way." Tay grinned and quickly scrolled through the designs. "It's for us, but also for everyone else who wants to be part of something bigger, you know? Like a statement." "I know exactly what you mean," James said, impressed by the maturity in his voice. Amira walked over, taking a seat beside them. "This is just the beginning. We're going to show the world that this neighborhood isn't defined by its struggles, but by the resilience of the people who live here." James nodded, his heart full. "And you're leading the way." Amira smiled, but there was a hint of something more in her eyes. "We're all leading now. It's not just about me anymore. It's about all of us." A year ago, James would never have imagined this moment. Back then, his focus had been on acquiring land, making deals, building wealth. He had never understood the kind of wealth that lay in the connections, the community, the promise of shared futures. The transformation within him was undeniable. As the morning wore on, the center's doors opened wide to the public for an open house. Families, teachers, volunteers, and neighbors arrived, greeted by music, food, and an atmosphere filled with excitement. James walked through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, but always returning to the core of what this project had come to represent. The people, not the buildings. Elizabeth arrived later that afternoon. She walked into the center, her eyes scanning the room, now filled with more activity than she ever expected. James saw her at the doorway, and their gazes met. No words yet, just a shared moment of recognition. It had taken time, but she was here, willing to see what her father had built. Elizabeth walked up to him, a tentative smile on her lips. "It's impressive," she said, her voice quieter than usual, but with a note of admiration that James had longed to hear. "It's just the start," James replied, his voice steady. "This place can change everything." Elizabeth's expression softened. "I think I'm starting to see that." James paused, looking around at the kids laughing, running through the halls, some already planning their next business ventures, others simply enjoying the freedom to dream. He looked back at Elizabeth, his daughter, and spoke the words he had never been able to fully articulate before. "I didn't know how much I'd been missing. This is what matters. Not the buildings, not the deals. It's the people. It's always been about the people." Elizabeth's eyes welled up, but she blinked them away. "You're doing it, Dad." "You're really doing it." James felt a weight lift from his chest, the years of strained distance between them suddenly bridged by this shared understanding. The house, the empire, the legacy he had thought he was building, it all seemed distant now, as if it were someone else's life. As evening fell, the center slowly emptied. The music faded, and the laughter softened into the distance, but the feeling in the air lingered. James stood at the doorway, watching as the last of the families left, their arms full of flyers, dreams, and promises of what was to come. Tay and Amira stood by his side. "She's moving now," James said, more to himself than anyone else. The weight of the words felt heavier than he expected, but it was true. Amira was no longer just a symbol of survival. She was moving forward, carving out a future for herself, for Tay, and for every child in Bronzeville who now had the chance to do the same. James knew he had helped create this, but the real work, the real change, had always been in their hands. And that was the legacy worth building.